to week 10 of 1020 QBT, Academic and Professional Skills for Science and Technology. This week, in this very short mini lecture, we'll be talking about academic and technical scientific writing. Everything that is in this short presentation is adapted from an approach to academic and technical scientific writing, which is something I've put together over the last 10 years. This is something based on the needs I found for undergraduate and postgraduate publishing academics when trying to figure out what academic writing actually was, what technical or scientific writing was, when they were struggling in the writing process. The approach that is included in this short presentation is just one approach. There are a number of ways of considering what academic writing is, what technical or scientific writing is. You can choose to apply the ideas that are in this presentation, but they're not prescriptive. If they're useful for you, please go ahead and use them. And of course, use any other approach that you find works for you, that helps you to create writing that fits the criteria. That's the most important point. In this mini lecture, first I'll background why we need a specific approach to academic and technical scientific writing. Then we'll look at one principle-based approach to academic and technical scientific writing that I've developed over the last 10 years in working with people who were writing PhDs, doctorate thesis, getting published in, or trying to get published in academic journals, or trying to pass first year in nursing or various other pursuits at university. And it's one approach. There are many different ways of thinking about academic writing. If it works for you, I'm very happy. It's not prescriptive. I'm not saying it's the only way of doing it, but many people find it helpful. So if you try this method and it works for you, I'll be very happy. If you try another method, that's fine. Essentially, it's two principles, clarity and accountability. And it's not as easy as it looks, but clarity is about structure, accuracy, and specificity. So in order to be clear, you need to have good structure, you need to have accurate choice of words, and you need to have specific nouns. That's basically it in this approach. Then we'll look at now what you can actually do with the information that you've got from this mini lecture. So why do we need a specific approach to academic and technical scientific writing? The first thing to do is we need to touch on the elephant in the room. Why aren't we saying professional writing? I thought this was academic and professional skills, so why aren't we doing academic and professional writing? Well, when I started putting this actual presentation together, I'd written academic and professional writing. In fact, I've been using that expression for many years, and then I suddenly realized when I was writing this and actually really getting the ideas down to explain that I wasn't using an accurate term. And it would be pretty ironic if in trying to explain that you're supposed to use accurate terminology to get the accuracy you need for your writing, I used a confusing and inaccurate term. Why is it an inaccurate term in this context? Well, technical reports, guides, standards for industry are the technical things you'll be doing as engineers or physiotherapists or IT professionals or scientists. You'll be writing scientific research results, for example. And yes, you might be doing many academic pieces of writing, which include research results and making structured argument. But these aren't the only forms of professional writing. And in fact, much of it's not, well, it's professional, but you don't get paid for it. And the definition of professional is actually to be paid for something, in some ways. So much of the academic things that are written are done for free, for the glory of adding to the science or for getting through university. Much of the technical things that are written for free by engineers who just think, well, someone's got to write this procedures manual or this guide of how to do this, and I'm just going to do it because otherwise no one's going to do it, so I'll just do it in my own free time. And a lot of science is done, well, for free. A lot of people are living on on a very low income, conducting research to move our society forward. But I digress. What I'm trying to say is that there are many forms of professional writing. Journalism is a very well established form of professional writing, as is fiction and non-fiction and education writing. So what sense do we make of this? The ones that are highlighted green are what you need to do at university and in your profession. You'll need to write reports, technical writing. You'll need to write guides, procedures manuals, and you'll need to understand and participate in the future in developing standards for your industry. Yes, you will be doing that. One day you'll be a veteran and you'll be doing that. You might start doing research, in which case you'll need to report scientifically, and that's why we'll get you to do that in university. So you learn how to write technically and scientifically in uni, so you can do those in your career. Similarly, academic writing you'll need to do in order to get through university, but also because you might have a future in academia on and off. Many people in their middle and later careers will be professional part-time and academic part-time as well, because let's face it, everything gets a little bit boring, so it's nice if you can have a couple of different pots on the boil, as we say. So quite a few people who are professionals are also academics who are active in university as lecturers and researchers and so forth. So journalism is not something that you'll be doing, but there are many people who do study journalism, and it's a very specific style, and it's very different in its aims and its process. Fiction, something you've read quite a bit of, novels, short stories, humour, script writing, so everything you see most things you see on your screen are scripted. Graphic novels, songwriting, poetry. So many of the songs you listen to are actually creative writing, which is a form of writing. Non-fiction writing, all the things we've read in the library when we were kids, telling us, what a stegosaurus looked like and why it had plates on its back, or how many planets there were in the solar system, and is Pluto really a planet, and what would happen if you flew a spaceship into the Van Allen belt, and I don't know, would you still have radio contact with Earth? All of that stuff that we read about in our school, books that we had at home. There's a lot of non-fiction writing, and there's a lot of education writing as well. Textbooks. Now, are textbooks scientific? Are they academic? Well, they serve an academic purpose to educate future academics. However, we can't really cite a textbook, not normally. Always check with your tutor whether the textbook you have can be cited. In most cases, the default answer is no. You shouldn't be citing a textbook. Why do you think that might be? You could pause the video and think about it, and you can answer to your screen. I can't hear you, but you could try and answer anyway. Let's think about it. The textbook is written on the basis of literature by one or more authors. It may or may not be peer-reviewed. It may go through, for example, a university body, such as Oxford University or Griffith University, but it doesn't go through the same process of peer review as a hard scientific research project. So it needs to serve the purpose of educating rather than being strictly technically objective and accurate. Also, it dates. It dates in the literature it refers to, and it dates merely because the process of publishing takes time and the cost of the book is high. So the book might be 5 or 6 years old. in the context of your areas, which is scientific, 6 years is a long time in the 21st century. So that's why we don't normally cite them. But in some cases you might not have much material to work with, and the teacher might let you cite from a textbook. Always ask your tutor or your lecturer if you can. Okay, so returning to this, what is green is the stuff that you need to be thinking about, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The stuff that's purple is the other types of writing that you need to move away from in order to write at university, unless you're doing journalism, or unless you're doing creative writing, or you're writing in the education field of designing textbooks, which is a specialized skill. How many technical, scientific, and academic items have you read in your life? Some of you, maybe a few, particularly if you've had a trade or a previous occupation where you did those things. In most cases, your experience with these might be pretty thin on the ground, and that's not your fault, and that's just the nature of society. I kind of wish we did more of this in high school. They should, well, I feel we should be giving high schoolers more access to hard science articles, just so they know what they look like, and they know the difference between hard science and, say, textbook science, or non-fiction, just sort of informative book or magazine. That would be nice. That's not what's happening. My view of education is not the same as everyone else's. There we go. The point I'm making is that most of the stuff you've read is written in a style which is completely inappropriate for what you have to do at university. So that's why I'm here talking about this right now. At this point you might be going, oh no, everything I've read, everything I've learned is useless. Well, no, because you've probably got great language skills and you can probably know how to put ideas together. What we need to do is we just need to adjust to the rules of technical, scientific, academic writing. And I can show you some principles which I think you can apply across all three of those fields successfully. And I hope they're useful for you. There are two other forms that we need to consider. Fake science. That's actually a professional writing skill. People put fake science and fake news on the internet, and they make money out of it. They get paid by some, think tank which is trying to sabotage the political system, or they get paid by sponsors, AdSense, just by getting, hits to their website. So when they get website traffic, they make money, even when the business on their website is not true. Clickbait survives for this reason. It's just a product of evolution. If there was no money to be made in creating clickbait, no one would do it. So it's a professional form of professional writing. Very clever form, actually. Okay. The main difference between academic, technical, and scientific forms of writing and the other forms we just looked at comes from the aim of the writing, the criteria, what you're trying to achieve. So here, journalism and fiction, which we are not writing, have very specific aims. Well, they will have a selection amongst these aims. And academic, technical, and scientific writing has or have their own aims. Journalism is trying to keep the reader on the page. Even if you don't have enough information to provide to the reader, you're still trying to keep them there because you want the ratings and the advertising. And you're trying to present the drama of our time. Drama. It's all about the drama. Because if you're not writing about anything significant, what's the point of writing it? So there's a little bit of, I guess, emphasis on the importance of everything that you're writing about as a journalist or as an editor. There's also entertainment and titillation, trying to keep the reader interested and maybe even entertain them in some way. There are, clickbait is an example of this, and news is guilty of this as well. When we look at the news, we might be looking for information on things, but we end up clicking on human interest stories or somewhat horrific things, or an explosion at a chemical factory somewhere overseas. Why do I need to watch that explosion? Why do I need to watch the massive wave crash into the village? Why do I need to watch that? This is a form of voyeurism, and journalism dips in and out of that depending on the quality of the paper and so forth. And it is kind of the bread and butter of a lot of news services, that people want to voyeuristically look at some of the sometimes very tragic but also wonderful things that happen around the world that are really none of their business. So we are titillated by the news, and that's part of what journalists try to do at different times, depending on their editor, to argue or persuade something, and to educate, again depending on your editor. If you read the ABC or the Guardian or SBS, it seems that the editors are pushing more towards education and informing. Whereas if you read news.com.au or other areas, they're just trying to keep you in there. They're trying to get you to click onto other things. A lot of titillation is in there, a lot of graphics, and a lot of words are used that are very sort of stimulatory. Okay, so that's journalism. Fiction is trying to stimulate the imagination, and for that reason, it's not informative. Fiction that is informative would be very, very boring. The whole idea with fiction is to not give the information, and the reader fills in all the gaps with their imagination, which is what is interesting for the reader. Fiction invokes emotions in the reader. It can entertain or titillate, that's sort of pulp fiction, if you like. It can also remove the reader from their reality, and high quality fiction and your cheap sort of fiction, well, I mean, what's quality? If people buy it, I guess it's good fiction. But what we might call pulp fiction, all have an element of fantasy in there, and the amount of fantasy there obviously depends on what the reader wants and what the writer is willing to write. So a lot of the pulp fiction that people read is about a fantasy, sheerly a fantasy and entertainment to get people out of their worlds. A lot of novels in the sort of horror tradition and the whodunit tradition, there is an aspect of fantasy in there. It's often people wanting to get a shock or wanting to feel scared or wanting to feel this idea of mystery. Now, other fiction, the quality fiction, often attempts to challenge the reader's worldview. I don't know, 1984, Orwell, Clockwork Orange. Many of these books were designed to sort of challenge what was going on around us, to tell us, hey, wake up. And you could say something like about the modern interpretations of that in not a book, but a fiction in a movie, because that's more the modern medium of, say, The Matrix. While it's 20 years old, the message was fairly strongly, can you trust your reality? Can you trust the authorities? What is real? What you are thinking? Is this something that you can just presume to be your reality, etc., etc.? Okay, so journalism and fiction are extremely essential forms of writing for our society, and you've read a lot of them, but you've got to put down a lot of the habits you've developed from reading and writing in those areas. And often your teachers have asked you to write in journalistic styles, even though they might not have known it and you might not have known it. And they've asked you to write a lot of fiction, for sure. Particularly in Australia's education system, we do that. But academic and technical and scientific writing is not something we've really been asked to write until we get to university, and suddenly they say, do it. So what do you do? Well, I'll tell you what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do, according to me, is to inform. You're trying to inform the reader. You're trying to pass on information as objectively as possible. And so balance is important, thoroughness is important, lack of bias is important, efficiency is also important because you've got a lot of information to get across very quickly. Now, while writing at university, and also professionally, but not as much, but at university you need to reflect, to analyze and deconstruct, or to make a case for something. These are skills that you will need as a professional. Not so much in writing, but you'll need to have reflective skills to work well as a professional, and you'll need to analyze and deconstruct to apply critical thinking, and you'll need to make a case for something. So here we're trying to develop your reflective and critical thinking skills, and so it's not really a part of academic and technical scientific writing. Nonetheless, when you do it, we expect you to write with academic, technical, and scientific principles in your writing, accuracy, efficiency, and so forth. and adequate citing of sources, because we just want you to develop that habit at the same time, and also to make your arguments and your more compelling, and to show more balance in your reflection and your analysis. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to inform. The information is the most important thing in academic, technical and scientific writing. Okay, let's look at some examples. Example of fiction. Here's a fiction by poet E. Cummings on the left. This fiction is called L open bracket A. That's not a typo. And the poem goes like this. L open bracket A, L E A F F A L L S close bracket O N E L I N E S S. These are not typos, and is that supposed to be loneliness? But there's an L missing. Oneliness. He's created a word. I wonder what oneliness is. Well, let's have a look what this is. So you have to look really carefully. It's sort of like something falling to the ground. A leaf falls. Oh, oneliness. Right. So Cummings has used punctuation in his own way, and that's something Cummings was famous for, to illustrate a concept in nature and try and get someone to feel a particular thought coming from a natural momentary occurrence. This is something that, it is well noted, is very similar to haiku poetry. Haiku poetry is very commonly written by court nobles and wandering monks and so forth about 500 years ago in Japan. And again, it has the idea of a moment showing a feeling or thought. His most famous example by Matsuo Basho, who was named that. He named himself Basho, actually. Basho just means a plantain. He used to carry around a sucker of a banana in his backpack, and he'd plant it wherever he was camping for the year and grow bananas, apparently. Anyway, these were probably cooking bananas, but I'm going way off the topic. So Matsuo Basho was a wandering monk who drank too much, but was welcomed into so many different houses and temples because he was such a lovely, interesting poet. And he was writing all the time. And he had his companion Isha, and Isha also wrote, and was also his muse to some extent. And this wandering poet is most well known for Ancient Pond, Frog Jumps, The Sound of Water. A very similar concept to E. Cummings about 500 years earlier. So where is this pond? What color is it? How big is it? How deep is it? How ancient is it? What kind of frog is it? What size frog is it? What season is this? Well, it's summer. The summer, frog is a summer word in Japan because the frogs all disappear in winter. I don't know where they go. Hibernate, I guess. And the sound of water. What water? How much water? Is this water splashing out of the pond and landing on the rocks? Is this water as the plop as the frog goes in? I mean, what? And many people trying to translate this poem really struggled here, because do they write plop or do they write the sound of water? Well, they shouldn't write plop, because that's not true to what Basho was trying to do, which is leave it to the imagination of the reader. And that's what fiction does. And songs do this too. Songs are not very obvious, except some American country pop songs. They just sort of say exactly what happened last Friday night. They just tell the story. It's very boring, banal. But there are many great songs written, and you don't quite know what they're talking about, and then you get it. For example, I don't know, Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2. It's actually about a skirmish between the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland. But the word Catholic and the word Protestant, the word Ireland, and Inniskillen, the place where it happened, none of that is mentioned. And great fiction, whether it's a poem or a song or a novel, is often about what is not mentioned and what your mind creates when you're reading it. So that's what makes fiction. Let's look at some journalism. Journalism takes fact but makes it interesting and fleshes it out, often because there's a lack of facts, because Often the facts are not available yet. And this seems to come from a tradition where a newspaper had to be produced and it needed to be as thick as possible, so the reader didn't feel ripped off for paying their $1 for it. Well, it used to be 20 cents, or it used to be, a farthing. And so you had to have stories fleshed out when there wasn't enough information. And this tradition seems to have continued into journalism. And I won't do a full breakdown of journalism, but what I will tell you is you have read a lot of journalism in your life, and you need to be very careful that the journalistic style doesn't overly influence what you're trying to do at university, because it's very different. What you're trying to do is use a little bit of information and write a lot of sentences. That's journalism. With academic writing, you're trying to write fewer sentences with a lot of information. And you've got to be able to efficiently do this. So here's an example of journalism. The Prime Minister has announced an intention to take Australia to space. Okay, so the title is PM vaunts space mission. This is designed to grab your attention. The word vaunt is used incorrectly here. Vaunt is about bragging. It's used here because it's an interesting word, and the reader goes, what does vaunt mean? Oh, this writer must be a bit smarter than me. Maybe if I read this, I'll know what vaunt means, because that's what the humans do. Now, it's also used incorrectly because it adds drama, this idea that the PM is bragging. Oh my goodness, the PM is bragging. Should they really be bragging about this? Wow, what gives them the right to brag? Have they put any money up? Oh, right, well, I want to know about this so I can make judgment on the Prime Minister. And that'll make me feel good about myself, because, then I'm judging the Prime Minister and he's important. And if I can judge the Prime Minister and I see him as a bit of a loser, then that makes me feel a bit better. So there's all sorts of emotions that go through the minds of readers when they read about anything in the news. And the journalist chooses words, sometimes knowingly, sometimes accidentally, that produce a reaction in the reader. And they also flesh out a very small number of facts into a large story. So you can have a read through this. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video. Pause the video. Beep. Okay, so now you've started the video. I take it you've read through it and you've realised that there's not much going on here. Apparently the Prime Minister went to the University of Adelaide, said, yeah, we might be good to launch some spaceships from Australia. There was the Minister of Education, Ministers of Employment, Industry as well. And the South Australian Premier said, wouldn't it be nice if we could get Woomera back? That's all that's happened. Nothing's actually seemed to be really done at all. The PM said something and a few people have commented on it. So the journalist has to flesh this out. That's journalism. Other journalism's about providing sort of detailed critique of something. There are many different kinds of journalism, but here's an example. This particular type of journalism, story, sort of fleshing out a story, illustrates that it's in many ways the opposite of what you're trying to do with academic writing. So please, when you're writing academically, you've really got to ignore a lot of the things that you've learned in the past about writing. More words are better. No, fewer words are better. Yeah. You've got to be interesting. No, actually, if you're boring and you're getting the information across, you're probably on the money. If you're writing technically, you've just got to get your point across. It's not about being interesting, using fancy words or anything like that. Okay. Let's have a look at some academic writing. Now, this academic writing, who am I to say that? I wrote this, so maybe I shouldn't be the best judge of this. But, well, my supervisor, when I presented this to her, said that this part of my project was acceptable, so I guess it's academic writing. Here in academic writing, it's a body paragraph. I'm starting with, as you can see, a topic sentence. The demographic profile and accompanying learning needs of university students in Australia has diversified and been reshaped by changes in its tertiary education sector and market demands. Okay, that's my point. That's why there's no in-text citation there. That's the point I'm going to make and support. So the rest of the paragraph supports that point. Deregulation of university funding, blah, 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 blah. Margins in 2009 as cited in Budge 2010, etc., etc. And so it's information dense, it's got a particular point to make, and there's a job to do. You do it, you move to the next paragraph. Each paragraph does its job, and within the paragraph each sentence does its job, and then that's it. No mucking around. So up until now, most of the writing you've been exposed to is fiction, general non-fiction, or journalism. Well, you won't focus on non-fiction because it's such a disparate kind of group that we can't really analyze it very easily. But it's interesting to look at fiction and journalism in contrast to academic, technical, and scientific writing in terms of how information, structure, and language choices are made or given. And this will help you to see what is academics, technical, and scientific writing and what isn't. And in particular, most of what you might have learned until now isn't, just because that is the way that many of our education systems in high school are oriented. At this point, you might be saying, why didn't my English teacher teach me language for university? Well, there are reasons why. They might be wanting you to expand your vocabulary to show how much you can express, and so forth. Myself, personally, I'd like to see a little bit more technical writing in high school, because if I'd learnt it, I think I would have definitely benefited. I had to learn it later on, which is much harder. But I digress. It's just this is how we've come to learn the language that we typically use, and many of us come to university with habits that come mainly from journalism, fiction, and other areas. And so we need to see what we're doing that we probably can't use in academic, technical, scientific, but they're things we can use. It's quite liberating actually, writing in the academic and technical scientific area, because there are tools you can use. Like, you can be boring. You can just repeat something. You can use the same word again, is what I'm saying. You can use the same word again and again. It's not a problem. You don't need to find synonyms, be interesting. You can be brief and say your point and move on. Whereas in journalism and fiction, that's not really acceptable. Let's have a look at it in detail. So looking at information in journalism, you withhold the information as long as possible, and it's fairly minimal because the journalist has really limited time and the resources are limited, finances are limited, access to information is limited. They have a very little amount of information. They have to flesh it out. In fiction, information is withheld, often completely, in order to just let the reader's imagination work, which is part of the interesting part of fiction. In academic and technical and scientific writing, information is everything. So you need to include all the relevant information, which is a massive amount. So there's information density, but it also must be clear. That's challenging. It's a bit of an art. But if you read good academic writing, you can see how it's done and you'll get it. Provide information as quickly as possible. Don't withhold it. And place that information in the order according to the convention of your discipline. That's what you have to do. Okay, so let's look at structure. In journalism, structure is kind of mysterious. It's kind of esoteric, kind of dark art. There's storytelling and scene setting, but it's not really chronological. Nothing happens in chronological order. If you look at the previous example of the Prime Minister and the space launch idea, that's not chronological. Things don't happen in a time order. It's not the Prime Minister this morning spoke at Adelaide University, flanked by Minister A, B, and C, and raised the idea of Australia developing a space industry. Again, full stop, one sentence, second sentence, the Premier of South Australia expressed enthusiasm. And then you just got two sentences, and you give that to your editor of the newspaper. The newspaper says, I want more, you've got to flesh that out. So you need to have this sort of esoteric storytelling style, which often involves jumping tenses. It's actually quite confusing. I'm not quite sure of some of the reasons why they do that, but if you read anything, including on the ABC, you'll find that there's a lot of interesting writing going on. The other thing is to report ideas, and I think this is what's happening, in order of their interest. Instead of giving out information bang, 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 it's like, well, what would be interesting? Let's put that first. And so there's a relevance to a story, to an idea that the journalist is looking to emphasize. And so the degree of relevance to that idea might determine when an idea or when a piece of information is given or not. And that idea that the journalist is working towards is often something they don't tell us directly. There's no topic sentence. They're trying to make a kind of an angle, but they're not going to tell you what that angle is. The secrets of journalism. Fiction. So fiction in its structure is surprising. For a start, it's usually chronological, because that's how we generally tell stories, and the mind likes to work chronologically. It's very comfortable in that order. And because there are so many unknowns in fiction, so much is left to the imagination, you've got to have at least one static thing, and that's usually time. Now, that some fiction plays with time, D.H. Thomas and a few others, they played with time. What was The White Hotel? Quite a few other books play with time, and you don't know whether you're coming or going. It's actually really quite disorienting. The Bone People, Kerry Hume, is a Hugo Award winner from New Zealand back in 1990, I think. That's another book that plays with time. Oops, hang on, when are we now? When did this happen? And you get flashbacks and so forth, and they don't tell you, this is a flashback. You'll see that in the movie, flashback montage, and they'll go back 10 years beforehand when this tragedy happened, and then the protagonist has to live with regret, and that has shaped who she is now, which is why she's so determined at the moment to do something. Sometimes it's a little bit obvious. Hollywood movies are very obvious when they flip time, but often fiction can flip it quite randomly. So unpredictability is a really important part of fiction. Structure in academic and technical writing has to be clear. This is really important. Clear structure. What makes it clear is all relative. So it might be clear to an engineer, but it won't be clear to a scientist in physical sciences, or to someone in IT, or a physiotherapist, because each discipline has its own definition of what is normal. And what is normal changes over the ages, over time, and changes by the group, the professional group, who communicate together. And this happens with non-professional groups as well. You have certain ways of communicating in certain groups. So quite naturally, there are conventions for each discipline, and even sub-conventions for sub-disciplines. So aerospace engineers tend to do things a certain way, and civil engineers tend to do something slightly different. And, they're not actually completely compatible. So you find the convention for your discipline and you follow it. Boring? Yeah. This tie is boring? Yeah. But if I wasn't wearing a tie, say I had a dead possum around my neck, you'd probably think I was a Fruit Loop and wouldn't watch anymore, right? So there's also just this degree of, okay, I'm one of the club, I'm playing by the rules, and you expect this to be here and it's here. And you need a certain degree of flexibility, of predictability in this writing, because the information is so dense in academic, scientific, and technical writing that if you don't have a predictable structure, you lose your reader like that. So it's really important to have the structure as required, as expected in your discipline. And it doesn't mean it's a better structure or it's a worse structure. Not at all. The only merit is that it's predictable within your context. If I took one of my papers that I wrote and maybe got a really high grade for example, to Iran maybe 150 years ago, where an essay was written in a spiral around a point which it never reached, they'd look at me and say, what are you doing? Are you some kind of egomaniac? You've just told us exactly what you think. You haven't given us any kind of scope to interpret this. Or they might just look at it and go, what is this? This is not a paper. What is this? They throw it out the window. Seriously, they would. And a similar thing might happen in England or Scotland or Ireland or Wales, Cornwall. Go back there, apparently where my linguistic roots come from, present them my essay 500 years ago. They look at this and say, I'm sorry, who are you? Oh, my name's Richard Allen Nucken Emerson. Yeah, but who are you? What shire are you from? Do I have to write the shire? What? You have to write the shire? You have to write the position of the shire? You have to write which abbey, at which abbey you learned Latin, and who your benefactors are? And there's no spiritual reference here. You haven't given any kind of credit to the God who created you. You're a blasphemer. I'd probably get executed, wouldn't I? So, conventions. Conventions of writing are kind of everything, because it's just what people expect. And what people expect makes it easier for them to read, particularly when there's a massive amount of information. Okay, so I've been talking so long it's become dark, by the way. Language choices, what word to use, what not to use. In journalism, you're going to choose the interesting word, the stimulating word. You're going to evoke emotion. So you'd have Prime Minister vaunts space, whatever it was. The evocation of emotion is the goal there, and that's what's important for the journalist. But that emotion is not something you want to evoke in academic, technical, and scientific writing. That's just deceptive writing. That's the last thing you want to be, is deceptive, emotive, etc., etc. The other thing that journalistic writing does is to create drama. Drama. This is so important, even when it's not. I didn't think it was important what colour t-shirt the Prime Minister wore on the weekend. I didn't know there was this rivalry between the sports teams of the Prime Minister and the Minister of the Opposition. Really, is it such a big deal? And it's actually not. They may be participating in it because they're playing the media, because what else do you do? Because the media annoy them a lot of the time, so they may as well make it work for them. When really, they might not care about that at all. Vilifying and lionizing just by a subtle change in word choice. You can make something sound fantastic or terrible. Words have connotations, and the connotation of the word is the emotional aspect of the word that's separate from its sort of definitive syntactical meaning, semantical meaning. I don't know the difference anymore. So, for example, a person such as myself could be described either as slim or skinny. Now, if you said slim, I'd say, oh, thank you. If you said skinny, I'd say, oh, thanks. Because it's not got a nice connotation. Whereas slim has a nice connotation. It's like, oh, you take care of yourself. Trim, yeah, yeah. Spry. These are words that a person would like to hear. Oh, I'm spry. Well, thank you. Whereas skinny, bony, weedy are not things a person would like to hear. So words have connotations, and they can either make a villain of someone or can make a hero of them, to vilify or lionize. And they can also persuade. Now, if we look at fiction, language choices are in particular to surprise, to keep interest, to stimulate, to evoke emotions, and to create drama again. And there is, of course, the connotation of the word is very important. One of the most important things is variety. If you use the word cloud in fiction, you don't use it again. You could do in journalism. You have to in academic and technical and scientific writing. You say cloud, you've got to keep saying cloud. You can't call it something else. In fiction, you'd have to call it little fluffy cotton wool of the sky, or, I don't know, something else. You can't use the word again because you would need to be interesting. Now, in academic, technical and scientific writing, the words chosen are there to be clear. So you're looking for accurate, specific, efficient. They're the three priorities in choosing a word. Is it accurate? Is it specific to meaning? And is it efficient? And there's usually only one word that would be correct. So synonyms are off the table most of the time, particularly with nouns. With the key nouns, with any noun, generally there's one word that'll do it, or one phrase that'll do it, nothing else. And you've got to make sure you choose very carefully your nouns in particular to describe an idea. So we're going to have a look at an approach to academic writing. Is there one approach? No, there's not one approach. There's lots of different advice about academic writing. This is just what I'm going to present to you today. You can take it and use it, or you can choose not to use it. It's not a prescription, but I can tell you that it's something that many people have benefited from referring to. So whatever approach sings to you is important, but you've got to make sure that you're getting it from an appropriate source. If if it's a university tutor or a textbook or a university website that gives you some ideas, and it's an Australian university in particular, because remember that writing is very different in Northern Europe, for example, or in the US, where university writing is a completely different kettle of fish. It's not technical writing. There's much more passion and expression in it. So you've got to make sure that you're getting something probably from an Australian university website. But yeah, take whatever advice works for you to help you write. And it's a continual process of development. You'll take some advice, you'll go with it, and after that you're going to just find your own way. You need to refer to the literature, refer in your field, refer to the conventions in your field, and use your abilities to figure out how you're supposed to write in your field. Now your tutors and your lecturers and the literature in your discipline, your field, will be the guides for this. Having said that,